1. Welcome to our ongoing class of the Chassidic approach to joy, focusing on the book from Rabbi Shlomo Majeski. And we are continuing where we left off last session, but I want to focus today a little bit more on what we said last time, but dig a little bit deeper and then ask about personal examples to really play this, because this is an important piece here, and I want to see how deeply we can play this out to how to actually manifest this idea. So what we were talking about last time was that how Chassidus highlights the power of the mind, that your mind has that capacity to take control of things, and teaches us that the mind is the key to the emotions. We don't have emotions if we don't have thoughts. So it begins with the brain, and then it comes down to the heart, and we have some emotions. And so if we can hit it off at the pass, if we can control thoughts, then we don't necessarily have to have our emotions out of control. We can control our emotions, by focusing on our thoughts. To change events that happened, that's not within our power. That's history. Stuff happens, it happens. But we can change, and we can control, we can choose the nature of our response to it and what we do with that. We have full control of our minds, and we can decide what we want to think about, and we can employ that control to become a master of our emotions. So talk about an example. Last week, we talked about the example of, something happens on the subway on the way home and he gets home and he's angry and just really seething with anger. And then the phone rings and he picks up the phone and talks to somebody he hasn't seen in years, who's a good friend. So by the time he gets off the phone, all the anger is gone. Well, we also do that we do that to ourselves in our own time, meaning that things happened in the past and we can think about them and stew in them and broil in them. And we can, so for example, and I'm going to use a really extreme example here. There are many people, there was a whole movement after the Holocaust of never again.
Remember that.
And some people, that became a part of their whole life, was never again. They didn't move on. They were so focused on never again that they remained focused in the past and what happened. There are many other people who went through the same things and were also focused on, never again. We can't let that happen again. We need to do what we can to avoid such a thing. But at the same time, that was only a part of their life. They then moved on to focus on what can I do here and now, and made a conscientious decision to focus on those things. And there's two parts. And again, we talked about this. We talked about, the guy welcoming at the door. You can welcome someone to the door and you can invite them in and the thoughts are going to keep coming. Or you can yell and scream at them and give them a lot of negative attention, but they'll keep coming because they're getting negative attention. Or you can not open the door whatsoever and find something else to focus on. So the same thing, there are people who, when they survived the Holocaust, they went to focus on, here I am now. What do I do with this? They found ways to move on by getting married. They'd already lost a spouse. They'd lost children. They went and got married. They went and raised more children. And they focused on the raising of the children. Some people did that, but kept a focus on never again. They kept going back to that as almost their core. And so they weren't really living in the present. And I think that nowadays we talk about, second generation survivors. Those people who had parents who were Holocaust survivors, and how that affected everything about their childhood and their growing up, to the point that they have their own mental health challenges now because they're second generation. So the idea then is choosing what we want to focus on, choosing where we want to put our mind to, and you focusing on those parts to it. And so there's another example he gives here. Avodah zarah, idolatry, right? Anger is considered like idolatry, because when someone gets angry, they've lost control, and they're angry at something that happened to them. And since that happened to them, they're not focusing on the fact that everything that happens is by God, by divine providence, and everything that God does is good, and therefore things must be good. And therefore, when someone becomes angry, they're denying that. They're either blaming it's God's fault and they're angry at God, or or they don't understand that there possibly could be good. But either in one way or another, they're denying that. They're denying God. So
could transient anger be a positive if it's a way of getting the emotion out and being done with it?
That is exactly the top of the conversation.
And I don't even have the book.
That was a good plant. Thank you. Yes. So psychologists will tell you that if you bottle it up, it'll boil over and it'll come out much worse. And you shouldn't bottle things up. We're not advocating bottle things up. What we're advocating is moving on. So anger, in the sense of anger is idolatry, there's a place for anger. If you need to get a communication across, like Moses came down from Mount Sinai and the Jewish people worshiping a golden calf, and he became angry and he threw down the tablets, right? Chassidus looks into that scenario and sees the brilliance of what Moses did. He didn't break the tablets. He didn't break the tablets out of anger. He broke the tablets because this is the wedding the wedding document for the Jewish people and God. If this is the wedding document, then they just committed adultery, which means that they're guilty of a capital offense, which means death. If we break the tablets, there's no document, they're not betrothed, and therefore it was not a capital offense. So he literally saved the Jewish people by throwing down the tablets. The anger was because those things only happen to us when we get sidetracked. And sometimes when you get sidetracked, you need a stern approach to say, get focused. And so Moses, he displayed anger. He didn't lose control. He displayed anger because it had a purpose, and that was to reprimand the Jewish people. And as soon as he did, everyone stopped the nonsense. Everyone regretted what they had done. The facade of their passions dissipated, and it was gone. It just had to be attached. It had to be attacked. And so Moses, being angry, attacked that stupidity, that nonsense that they were involved in, and immediately it dissipated. The throwing down the tablets saved the Jewish people. So if we look at the idea of anger, if it has a purpose and it's controlled and it's done with intent, then that's not anger. That's not avodah zarah. That's not idol worship. But what is, when a person loses control of their thought process, when loses their self-control, that means they've given up on God and the world, and they've given up to something else. That's idol worship. So if someone loses control and gets angry, then that's the type of idol worship we're talking about.
So is the illness
say again?
Is the illness PTSD fall within that? Or is that something else because there's other circumstances that are happening that are outside of control?
And I think each situation, each individual situation needs to be completely addressed on an individual basis. A lot of times the PTSD and some of the things that the Holocaust survivors went through, there was a thing called survivor's guilt. You know, it should have been me. Like, I don't deserve to have survived. I don't deserve to have lived, right? So again, there's a mental health process you can go through that a person can go through that gets out of hand, and you can try to deal with it. But at the end of the day, you're still here. And if you truly believe in God and everything God does is good, then you're not done. You have a mission. Your job is not done here. You have something to accomplish here. You're here for a reason, and you have to focus on that. And if you will focus on that, then you will be able to move forward and progress and get something done in the world. If you get caught up in, it should have been me and I shouldn't have survived and I'm not as good as they were, and all those things, then we talk about a serious mental illness that's debilitating.
I've had that same sort of thought when a close friend or a family member dies who's younger than me, and why them, why not me? It doesn't seem fair, but I get over it. It's a thought that lasts for a day or two and it's gone. But
right,
I've had the experience without having to have the Holocaust as a reason for it.
And you could have chosen to stay in that place and fixate on that problem, and it would have not been healthy for anyone.
No.
But you made a conscientious choice to move on and focus on what you can do and be productive in the world. And that's what we're talking about, making a conscientious choice on what your emotions are going to be. And no matter what the time, whether it's the anger of some situation or some event that's happened, or when we talk about emotions like jealousy, right? These emotions are going to come up. They're human emotions. They're going to come up. The question is, when they come up, what do you do with them? And we go back to that same story about the guy at the door. You can either entertain the idea and get involved in it, or you can be angry about it and rage within yourself about having those emotions, what a horrible thing it is to have those emotions. Or you can choose to not have the emotions, to not think about it, and to support that by focusing on something completely else, just to go a different direction. Exercising control. That's the hard part, is to exercise control. So my question is, you just gave us an example. That's what I want to focus on today, is if we could come up with some examples of times when we had an emotion that came up and we chose what to do with that. So we're looking for examples here. So you gave an example of when a friend passed away and you felt,
Or I lost a younger brother. It was the same thing. Why should he die first?
So not just a friend, a family member, a younger brother. Yeah.
I mean, another example is more recent, is with the COVID-19 vaccinations. I was able to get my first one two weeks ago, and the thought enters my mind, are there not other people who are more deserving of it than me?
Yeah. And then, so how did you stay away from that?
I guess I stayed away from it by saying it, I'm not the one who's making the decision, and it would be wrong for me not to get it because I still have things to offer in life. And hopefully everybody who wants it will get it, and soon.
Right.
I couldn't dwell on it, and I thought it'd be foolish to turn it down for that reason.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the other part we oftentimes do is that when we have a decision and we're not sure of what to do with that decision, sometimes we can seek out some insights from family or friends, advisors. I know one of the things that Rebbe would talk about is that if you get an opinion on something important, financial, medical, whatever it is, and you're not so sure about that answer, seek a second opinion. And oftentimes you could seek the second opinion from Yedidin Umavinin, someone who's close to you, who understands the topic. So in other words, if an oncologist tells a person about a diagnosis, you want to get a second opinion. But the second opinion doesn't necessarily have to be another oncologist. You could go to a family friend who's a physician, not an oncologist, but he understands medicine, to ask him his thoughts on the situation.
What I used to tell my patients is that it's fine to get a second opinion, but don't keep getting opinions, because you're eventually going to get an opinion that it's going to agree with what you want to hear.
You know, we have the same thing with getting a rabbinical opinion. You know, don't search rabbis. Go for one, get a second if you need. And if you have two opposites and you need a third to arbitrate between them, a third is also fine. That's it. Don't keep shopping.
There are people that will shop until somebody agrees with their opinion.
Yes. Yes.
You'll always be able to find someone if you keep looking.
Yeah. But then you're not looking for an honest or sponsored answer. You're searching for something you want to hear.
Yeah, you're searching for support for your idea.
Yes. Yeah, example. So Dave, any examples of when emotions came up and you had to challenge those emotions because it was not leading you in the right path?
Yeah, one thing comes to mind a long time ago when I worked for the airline. I interviewed for a position and I was told, oh, a number of people were promoting me. And after I had this final interview, I was told, yep, you're going to have the position. Looks like you're going to have it. And the next day I get the rejection. And it turned out that the people up top decided, oh, he doesn't fit what we want to have, the people that we want to have fill this position. He's not minority, he's not this, he's not female, whatever. So even though I passed and I was told that I was going to have the position, it was taken from me.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, it's easier for the interviewer to end the interview with something positive, even though he's
might not be
sure
true.
he's going to get it.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, there's a reason that I'm not getting it. So I'm not gonna let it affect me. I'm just gonna continue on.
Right.
So
you
and
made a
another time-
conscientious choice.
right. And another time, the airline, I interviewed for instructor, and I had already been helping people in areas and stuff like that. And I went for an interview to become an instructor, and the person was falling asleep during my interview. I says, well, they must have made their choice already.
Yeah.
They're just doing this because they have to.
Right.
And I terminated the interview and walked out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Conscientious choice.
Yeah.
But what did you do with the emotions involved?
Well, I was, I knew things weren't always fair, but that went on just to prove it. And I says, well, the saying in Chicago, you can't fight the politics. So a realization that there's only so much that I could do, and I can't buck whatever it is that they have in place. There's no sense in letting it completely affect me because it's beyond my control.
I just want to say there's another possibility there that you didn't realize, and this is from personal experience. I mean, I have something called obstructive sleep apnea, which means you stop breathing during the night and keep frequently waking up, so you're sleepy the next day. I use what's called a CPAP machine to correct that, but I also have chronic insomnia where I can't fall asleep. So I've got two strikes against me. And, sometimes for medical reasons, I'll start to doze off no matter how hard I don't want to. And it's possible that the person who was interviewing you had one or both of these problems. So I don't think you should immediately jump to the conclusion that he wasn't interested. There's at least one other possibility.
Well, it was also the way he was asking the questions. Like,
Okay.
yeah, there was more than one clue.
Okay.
Right.
And I suspect you read it correctly.
Yeah. And for
Yeah,
and,
there's-
and our focus here is that, you know, when you've had the bad experience, what do you do with that? You know, what choices do you make with it, and how do you move forward? Any examples of something that haunted you for a period of time, something that you had strong emotions about and that lasted for a longer period?
I don't know if this is what you're thinking of, but as a young child, we lived in Long Beach, California, because my dad worked for the Navy and there's a big naval base out there. And there are a lot of oil wells around us. And one evening we went for a drive and there was this big oil well fire. And for a long time after that, I used to have nightmares about oil well fires. And it got to the point where doctor prescribed phenobarbital, which is basically a sedative to try and prevent them. And I don't know how they went away. I don't know what did the trick. I mean, I wasn't old enough to look at it the way you're looking at it now, but I can still remember having those nightmares.
Yeah. Well, and I think so. The prescription medication, and this goes back to Dave's question about, you know, PTSD sometimes, right? So sometimes we're caught in a vicious cycle that it's a loop and we can't get out of that one. And sometimes a short-term prescription of medication can break the loop, allow us the time to focus on other things, and then make the choice not to go back to that. You know, so that's a good example of something where, you know, short-term interim support can find a way to help give us the strengthen us to have the ability to make a decision not to go down that path again. And so that's and again, it kind of comes back to, again, the mind control, the conscientious decision. Sometimes it needs a little bit of extra help, either with some therapy, some psychotherapy, some discussion therapy, or medication interventions. But, you know, so, to give us enough of a break from it. You know, I think in the physical sense, you know, sometimes I saw my wife and I just went through the COVID, you know, for a couple of weeks there. And I remember in discussion with my mother, she said, you know, so how do you feel, like on a scale of 1 to 10? And I said, I'm not feeling well, but I've had a kidney stone. And this is not as bad as a kidney stone. Having experienced a pain level of 10 out of 10, where I couldn't even find a position to get comfort in. So I was constantly just wreathing, literally wreathing in pain. And so when I got a medication to take that pain away, I could start to breathe again. But I was short of breath because it was so hard. Right? So that's the physical. The emotional is the same way. Sometimes we're so looped into an emotion that we can't get away from it. Enough of a break to be able to get out of that. Now, you ever heard about the idea of you know, if your arm is hurting you, let me step on your toe?
Yep.
It caused a greater pain. But what happens? Your mind is taken away from the other piece, right? And so it's the same thing. It's like, you know, hopefully you don't have to get a bigger stress to get away from one stress, right? But our mind can do that.
But that sort of thing is actually practiced in medicine, not to that extent, obviously, but a lot of medications for itching work by a counter-irritant effect. So you put something on your skin like menthol, and it causes a different type of sensation and gets your mind off the itching.
My wife and I were in a car accident a number of years ago in Long Beach, actually. We were on our way from Long Beach up to O'Hare, to LAX. My wife was going to a wedding. We had a baby in the back seat, car seat, strapped in really good. And a trucker was in the 4th lane and decided he was moving into the 3rd lane. Now, it was illegal for him to be in the 4th lane anyway. But he came in and his back right tire grabbed the front left end of our car and
Oh.
threw us into 360s across 4 lanes. And we stopped just short of the ravine. We took out a 4x4 post on the way across there. And thank God there were no other cars in the lanes next to us. This was back in the 80s, so there was no cell phones, but there was a taxi cab coming up the ramp that the on-ramp that we stopped on. And he had a radio. He called dispatch. Dispatch sent the California Highway Patrol. So we actually had somebody there, moments later. But for 2 months after that, we were wearing TENS units. TENS units are the
Yes.
transdermal electronic nerve stimulators. So essentially, we were told that these little electrical shocks, and we had a control, so you could increase how much power it had and how frequent it had. But you could control those things. And he said the idea is that the pain you're suffering is filling your brain. If you raise the TENS units up to the point where this overstimulates the nerve system and the nerve system can't focus on the other pain. So it becomes a choice again. Which pain do I want to focus on, right? So again, the idea of, in an emotional sense of things, we can control our emotions through our mind. Our mind can control. No emotions can come up without first going through the mind. We have a choice what we want to focus on. There are some times that you'll get upset. Something comes up and we get upset, and we should know that we can either meditate on what we're upset about, and that'll fuel the fire for sure. And then we'll have all types of other ideations about what we could do with this to fight back or to get even, or all the different ideas that are there. Or we can turn our attention to a completely different subject. That other topic, the original topic, might come up again, but then we can change our minds to a different subject again. There was once a chassid who he had a particular sin, whatever that may be, pride, ego, whatever it was. He had a particular thing that kept coming up, and he was asking his Rebbe for advice on how to handle this. And he said, can you control that for 60 seconds? Can you not focus on that for 60 seconds? Can you keep your mind on something else for 60 seconds? And he said, 60 seconds I can do. I can do 60 seconds. The Rebbe said, okay. At the end of the 60 seconds, do it again. And keep doing it. And if you keep doing it, then the thought keeps going away and keeps going away until it quits banging on the door. And you may have to do it 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 times. But if you consistently divert the thought process to something else, you can control it. And, so I think I'm at this moment, I'm also blanking on personal examples of, something like this. But I think that, and we'll talk about this, I think, again later, but I remember when my father passed away, and my mom and I coined a term, spontaneous tears. It seemed to be that for the next year, there were times when I would just burst into tears. I had nothing was, I was busy doing something else, and the tears just came. And those are honest emotions, and it's a deep loss. It's an irreplaceable loss. But there's a time for that. There's a time for mourning and a time to move on. And by the end of the year, they stopped coming. Right? But I didn't. When those emotions came up and the tears came up, I would take the time to embrace them. And then, okay, now put them aside and get back to what we're doing. And so, there's a time to embrace the mourning, embrace the emotion, be honest about the emotion. I know what this emotion is, whether that's anger or depression or sadness, or I recognize it, see it for what it is. I make a conscientious choice to either spend some time with it and then move on, or to immediately move on. But it is within our control to make that decision. We're going to, next session, we're going to stop here, but the next section we're going to talk about growing from pain. Again, embracing the moment, embracing what we're feeling, and then choosing what to do with it. And we'll talk about that one in our next session.
I've got
Thank you
something
very
that's
much.